The rain had been falling since Tuesday, and Gemma Dunbar had been counting her last $20 bill since Monday. She walked along Bloor Street with her shoulders pulled up against the wet, her resume folded inside a plastic sleeve inside her bag, a precaution her grandmother had taught her. Always protect the things that matter, and her sneakers so soaked through that she'd stopped noticing the cold seeping into her toes somewhere around Spadina. 3 days without a proper meal, 2 weeks without a callback, 4 months since the Rosedale Branch Library had closed its doors and taken her job with it. She was looking at a help wanted card taped inside a dry cleaner's window when she nearly stepped on it. A leather portfolio, dark brown, the kind that cost more than her last month's rent, lying flat against the curb, wedged between a fire hydrant and a damp pile of leaves. Someone had dropped it getting into a car, probably. The city moved that way, fast, careless, forgetting things that mattered. She picked it up, stood there in the rain. Don't, she thought, just leave it for someone else. But it was a Tuesday in November, and no one else was coming. She opened it. The cash was the first thing she saw. $300, maybe more, folded neatly inside a side pocket. Her stomach contracted. With that much, she could pay for another week at the rooming house on Dundas. She could eat. She could breathe. Her fingers hovered. Then she turned over the inner flap, and something fell out. A piece of paper the size of a birthday card, folded in half, the kind of fold that only small hands make. She caught it before it hit the puddle. A crayon drawing, a house, a tall man with dark hair and a suit, a small boy in a red jacket with his arms spread wide like he was flying, and at the bottom, in letters that wobbled between printing and something else entirely, Dad and me, from Otto. Gemma stood very still for a long moment. She thought about her grandmother, Edith Dunbar, who'd raised her in a semi-detached on Danforth, who'd said, "You always know what's right, Gem. I don't need to teach you. You already know." And she thought about how that woman had worked 31 years as a school custodian and never once taken a thing that wasn't hers. Not a paperclip, not a mug of coffee. She found the business card tucked against the front sleeve. Leon Harker, Chief Executive Officer, Harker Technologies, Inc. The address was on King Street West. Gemma refolded Otto's drawing carefully, tucked it back, and closed the portfolio. Then she started walking south. The lobby of Harker Technologies was everything Bloor Street in the rain was not. Marble floors, lighting that came from everywhere and nowhere, a reception desk that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never had to ask for a job. The woman behind the desk looked at Gemma the way airport security looks at an unmarked bag. "I'm here to return something to Leon Harker," Gemma said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "It's his. He dropped it." "Mr. Harker doesn't accept walk-ins." The woman had already looked back at her screen. "If you found something, you can leave it with security." "I'd rather give it to him directly." "That's not how." "I walked 40 minutes in the rain." Gemma said it quietly, without edge. "I'm not going to give this to someone I don't know. If he finds out later that someone returned his portfolio and you turned them away, that's on you. I'm just saying." A long pause. The receptionist's eyes moved to the folio, then back to Gemma's face. Her wet hair, her soaked jacket, the kind of face that wasn't asking for anything, just stating facts. She picked up the phone. Leon Harker came down because his assistant had told him there was a woman in the lobby who refused to leave the portfolio with anyone else and seemed, "Sir, I know this sounds odd," seemed like she meant it. He was in the middle of a call with a venture capital firm in Vancouver. He ended it. He stepped out of the elevator expecting a quick handshake, a thank you, a modest suggestion of a reward. That was usually how these things went. What he saw instead was a young woman in a wet jacket who was standing exactly where she'd been told to stand, her arms at her sides, holding the portfolio against her ribs like it was something worth protecting. She had dark circles under her eyes. She also had a quality he couldn't name immediately, something in the way she stood, upright but not rigid, that made him slow his pace slightly before he crossed the lobby. "Mr. Harker," she said. Yes, he took the portfolio from her, opened it. Everything was there: the Langford contract, the USB drive, the cash, his emergency credit card. He looked up. "You didn't take anything." "It wasn't mine." He studied her face. She wasn't asking to be admired for that. She was just saying it plainly, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "What's your name?" "Gemma Dunbar." "How did you know where to come?" "Your card." "Anyone else would have called," he said, "or just kept the cash." Gemma was quiet for a second. There was a drawing in there, a boy named Otto. Leon said nothing. "I figured the money you can replace," she said. "That you can't." He looked at her for a long moment, then he said, "Come upstairs." She blinked. "That's not necessary." "You walked 40 minutes in the rain and you're soaked through. Come upstairs. It's the least I can do." She sat in the chair across from his desk with a mug of tea she hadn't asked for, and a plate of shortbread someone had quietly placed beside her. She didn't touch the shortbread immediately. Then she did. It was the first warm thing she'd eaten since Sunday. He watched her hands around the mug, the way she held it with both palms, like someone who had been cold for a long time. "You said you were looking for work," he said. She hadn't said that, but she hadn't hidden it either. "My position was eliminated," she said. "Branch library. I coordinated children's programming." He leaned back. "And before that?" "Before that, I was taking care of my grandmother. She passed last spring." "So you've been looking since?" 4 months. She said it without drama. "Just a fact, like all the others. I've applied everywhere. I have a Bachelor of Library Science and 3 years of experience with developmental programming for children aged 2 through 8. Apparently that's not as useful outside of libraries as I thought." He almost smiled, almost. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. The number was St. Michael's Elementary School. His stomach dropped in the particular way it always did when that number appeared. "I have to take this," he said. He stepped to the window. She looked at her tea. What she heard, he wasn't trying to hide it, was, "He won't come out? How long? No, he's done this before. He just needs, I'm coming." He ended the call and picked up his jacket. He stopped. He looked at Gemma. She was already standing, folding the paper napkin neatly beside the plate. "My son," he said. "He's locked himself in the school bathroom. He does this sometimes since his mother." He stopped, reorganized. "He doesn't respond to the staff. I have to go." "Of course." He was already moving toward the door. Then he paused again, and he could not fully explain to himself why he did what he did next. "Would you? Is there any reason you couldn't come with me?" Gemma looked at him, not confused, just waiting. "I know that's an odd request," he said. "You don't owe me anything. But I've watched 3 counselors try to coax him out of bathrooms and none of them have succeeded, and I thought." He pressed his fingers to his mouth for a moment. "I don't know what I thought." Gemma picked up her bag. "Let's go." The hallway outside the second-floor boys' bathroom at St. Michael's smelled like industrial cleaner and old sneakers. The vice principal stood at a cautious distance. 2 teachers hovered near the water fountain, speaking in low, careful voices. Leon knocked on the door. "Otto, buddy, it's Dad." Silence. "No one's angry with you. Nothing's wrong. Can you open the door?" Nothing. Gemma stood back against the wall, giving them space. She wasn't in a hurry. She'd learned, somewhere between her grandmother's bedside during the bad months and 2 years of coaxing 4-year-olds to participate in Story Circle, that patience wasn't passive. It was its own kind of presence. She started humming. Very softly, no words, just a melody her grandmother used to hum while she folded laundry, an old Gordon Lightfoot tune, the kind that Edith Dunbar had absorbed from decades of Canadian winters and never quite let go of. There was a sound from behind the door, a small shifting sound. Gemma kept humming. The lock clicked. The door opened 2 inches. A small eye, brown, cautious, swollen slightly from crying, appeared in the gap. It looked past Leon. It found Gemma. She stopped humming and just looked back at him. Didn't wave, didn't smile too wide, didn't speak. Just looked the way you'd look at a bird that had landed unexpectedly close and you didn't want to startle it away. Otto opened the door. He was 6 years old and wearing a red jacket with a broken zipper pull, and he walked straight past his father and stood in front of Gemma and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "What song was that?" Gemma crouched to his level. "An old one," she said. "My grandma taught it to me." "Is your grandma here?" No, she's gone, but I still remember all her songs. Otto considered this with the grave seriousness that only small children and very old people can muster. Then he said, "Can you teach me one?" "Sure," she said. "Do you want to start with a short one or a long one?" "A medium one." "I know exactly the right one." Behind them, Leon Harker stood very still in the hallway, the vice principal and the two teachers forgotten entirely, watching his son, who had not held a stranger's hand in 2 years, take Gemma Dunbar's hand and lead her down the hall toward the exit. He didn't understand what had just happened. But for the first time in a very long time, he felt something loosen in his chest. The offer came the next morning. Gemma was at the rooming house on Dundas, filling out an application for a part-time position at a recreation center in Scarborough, when her phone rang. "I have a proposal," Leon said, "and I want you to know before I explain it that this isn't about sympathy." "All right." "Otto needs someone. He's been through 2 nannies and a child development consultant since his mother passed, and none of them have reached him. Yesterday you reached him in about 4 minutes in a hallway." Gemma was quiet. "I'm offering a position as his primary after-school caregiver. There's a guest suite on the 3rd floor of the house. It's yours if you want it. The salary is fair and then some." "Leon, I'm not a therapist. I don't have childcare credentials. I'm a librarian who spent 3 years reading picture books to toddlers." "I know exactly what you are," he said. "That's why I'm calling." She looked around her room. The water stain on the ceiling, the single window that faced a brick wall, the spare and careful life she'd been building out of what was left. She thought about Otto's hand in hers. She thought about the drawing in the portfolio. "Dad and me, from Otto. I'll want to meet with him first," she said. "Properly, before I agree to anything. Of course. And I want it to be his choice as much as mine." A pause on his end, something quiet in it, like respect. "Agreed," Leon said. The house was in Rosedale, the same neighborhood the library branch had served, which struck Gemma as the kind of coincidence her grandmother would have called the universe being cute. It was a Victorian semi with a wide front porch and a maple in the backyard that had gone fully gold. Agnes, the housekeeper, met Gemma at the door, with the brisk warmth of someone who had been hoping for exactly this even though she hadn't said so. She showed Gemma the guest suite, clean, high-ceilinged, with a window seat and its own small bathroom, and then she showed her where the tea was kept, which told Gemma everything she needed to know about Agnes. Otto was in the living room building a city out of wooden blocks. He looked up when Gemma came in and said, "You're back." "I am." "Did you bring the medium song?" "It's in my head," she said, tapping her temple, "wherever I go." He moved over on the rug to make room for her, and she sat down, and they built the city together for 40 minutes before he said, matter-of-factly, "I want you to stay." She looked at him. "Yeah?" "Yeah." He placed a block on the tallest tower. "Dad needs someone too. He doesn't say so, but I can tell." Gemma didn't answer that, but she filed it away. The weeks that followed had a rhythm she hadn't expected to find. Otto in the mornings, before Leon had even left his desk. Otto after school. Homework spread on the kitchen table, his pencil case knocked sideways, a glass of milk warming beside him while he talked and talked and talked, after 2 years of barely a word. Agnes watching from the counter with an expression Gemma came to recognize as barely contained delight. And in the evenings, Leon. Not at first. At first he worked late, came home after Otto was asleep. Careful, deliberate, she understood it. He was a man who had built walls because the last time he'd let someone pass them, losing her had nearly undone him entirely. But Otto had no patience for walls. "Can you stay for dinner?" he started asking his father. "Then, can you help us with the tower? Then, Gemma says if you lean the dominoes like this, they all fall better. Can you come see?" Leon came each time he stayed a little longer. Gemma noticed the evening he put his phone face down on the table without being asked. She noticed the evening he laughed. A real laugh, unprompted, because Otto had narrated an imaginary battle between his wooden blocks in a surprisingly accurate pirate accent. She didn't say anything about it. She just kept making tea and letting the evenings grow. One night in December, after Otto was in bed and the house was quiet, she found Leon in the kitchen standing at the counter with a mug he hadn't touched, looking at nothing in particular. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said. You're not. He moved to give her space at the counter. Can't sleep, you? I was going to make chamomile. She filled the kettle. Otto told me today that he wants to learn guitar. God. He also told me he wants to build a rocket ship. I said we'd start with cardboard. Leon watched her find the mugs. She moved through his kitchen with the ease of someone who'd stopped feeling like a guest. Not carelessly, but naturally. You applied for the ECE certificate program, he said. She looked up. Agnes told you. Agnes tells me things she thinks I'd want to know. Gemma set the kettle on the base. I have an interview next week. Evening classes. It won't affect Otto's schedule. I wasn't asking about that. He was quiet for a moment. I was going to say that I'd like to cover the fees if you'd let me. That's not charity, he said it quietly but firmly. You change things here, Gemma. Otto is himself again, fully, genuinely himself, and that's not something I can just pay a month's salary for and call it even. She looked at the kettle. I need to know that what I'm doing here I'm doing because it's right, not because I'm indebted to it. He was silent, and then, that's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years. The kettle clicked off. She poured the water. Think about it, he said. No deadline. She left the chamomile on the counter for him and took her mug upstairs. She sat on the window seat and watched the street below, the frost on the parked cars, the orange glow of the streetlights, and thought about honesty and walls and what it meant to let a place start feeling like home. It was Agnes who, in her practical way, told Leon what he probably already knew. That woman, Agnes said, stacking dishes without looking at him, is the best thing that has happened to this house since your wife planted that maple in the backyard. I'm telling you now so you can stop pretending you haven't noticed. Leon didn't answer. She returned your portfolio in the rain, Agnes continued. She brought your boy out of a bathroom with a song. She sits on the floor to build towers and never makes him feel like it's beneath her, and she hands back the change when you give her too much for groceries. Agnes set a mug down with a small, definitive click. A person doesn't need a psychology degree to see what that is. Leon looked out the kitchen window at the maple, stripped and still in the December cold. She's also terrified, he said, of trusting any of this. Well, said Agnes, so are you. The pair of you should sort that out. He asked her to accompany him to a year-end function. Dinner at the Fairmont, board members and partners, the kind of event he'd been attending alone for 2 years with a face that discouraged questions. He told her it was optional. He told her he simply would like her there. She said she didn't have anything to wear to a Fairmont dinner. He said he'd spoken to his sister, who apparently had opinions about this, and would like to help. His sister, he added, had been asking to meet Gemma for 3 weeks. She agreed. His sister Cassie arrived with 2 dresses on a hanger and a manner that immediately made Gemma feel like she'd known her for years. The dress she pressed into Gemma's hands was a deep burgundy, simple and long, the kind that required nothing else. When Gemma came downstairs that evening, Otto was sitting on the steps in his pajamas, well past his bedtime, because he had correctly intuited that something significant was happening and refused to miss it. You look like a queen, he said, with the authority of someone who had clearly thought about this. Leon, waiting at the bottom of the stairs in a dark suit, didn't say anything for a moment. He's not wrong, he said finally. The dinner was large and polished and full of the kind of conversation that required Gemma to remember that she had, in fact, spent 4 years at university and 3 more managing a library program that served an entire neighborhood. That she was not out of place because she had no right to be there, but rather because someone in this room had decided she had none. When that someone, a partner's spouse who had somehow learned about the rooming house on Dundas, made a remark that was dressed as curiosity but built like a dismissal, Leon did not raise his voice. He said, quietly, Gemma coordinated literacy programming for over 400 children annually before her branch was shut down by the city. She also, the day we met, returned my portfolio in November rain when she hadn't eaten properly in 3 days. What were you doing that day? Nobody at the table said anything. Gemma looked at her hands in her lap. Then she looked up at him, and something shifted in her chest that she hadn't had a name for until precisely that moment. The garden in December was bare-boned and beautiful. The maple had dropped everything now, and the wooden bench beneath it had a skim of frost that neither of them moved to brush off when they sat down with their coats on, their breath rising in small, pale clouds between them. "You didn't have to do that," she said, "at dinner." "I know." He was quiet. Then, "My wife used to sit out here when she needed to think." She said the cold made everything clearer. Gemma looked at the tree. Was she right? Mostly. He turned toward her. "There's something I want to say, and I want to say it clearly. Not because I expect anything, just because you deserve the honesty." She felt her pulse shift. "Since you came here," Leon said, "I've come home earlier. I put my phone down. I laugh at things I'd forgotten were funny. Otto is himself again. Fully, genuinely himself. And every time I think about how that happened, I think about a woman standing in my lobby in a wet jacket saying it wasn't mine, as if that were the simplest thing on earth." The frost had crept up her coat sleeve. She didn't move. "I'm not asking for anything to change," he said. "I know that trust like that takes time, especially when you've spent months just trying to survive. But I would rather tell you than carry it around pretending I'm not." "What are you telling me?" she asked. He looked at her steadily. "That I've fallen in love with you. Somewhere between the lobby and the hallway and the kitchen and the 100 evenings since. I don't know the exact moment. I just know it's true." Gemma sat with that. The cold air moved through the maple branches above them, a sound like patience itself. "I'm scared," she said finally. "I know. I've been so careful about not needing things, about not letting myself believe in things. I know that too." She looked at him. "Give me time." "As much as you need." "But Leon," she stopped, started again. "I want you to know that what I feel in this house, around you and Otto, is the first time I've felt like myself since my grandmother died, and I don't take that lightly." He nodded. He didn't push. They sat in the cold for another few minutes without speaking, and when she finally stood up and said good night, she could feel the certainty of something already decided, even if she hadn't said so yet. She said yes at breakfast. Not to a question. He hadn't asked one. She just came downstairs and found him and Otto and Agnes in the kitchen, Otto narrating a dream about a submarine made of cheese, and she stood in the doorway for a moment watching all three of them and thought, "This is it. This is the thing." "I'll take the certificate program," she said, setting her mug on the counter. "And before you say anything, I'll accept the fee because I looked it up last night and it's the right thing for my career. And accepting help that makes sense isn't the same as charity. I know the difference now." Leon looked up from his coffee. "All right. And the other thing," she said, looking at him steadily, "that you said in the garden, I've been thinking about it." Otto had gone very still over his cereal bowl, with the practiced attentiveness of a child who has learned that important things happen between adults right at the beginning of the morning. "And," Leon said. "And I think," Gemma said, "that you should stop giving me time, because I don't need any more of it." The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds before Otto said yes, very quietly, as though he had been waiting for this for considerably longer than the rest of them. They were married the following May, in the backyard, under the maple that had come back into leaf. Otto carried the rings in a small wooden box he'd painted himself, somewhat chaotically, in blue and green and a yellow that he had been told was too bright and had used anyway. He walked with the solemnity of someone carrying something irreplaceable, which was, in fact, exactly what he was doing. Gemma wore a dress the color of morning light and her grandmother's ring on her right hand. She had done her own hair and spent 20 minutes in front of the mirror recognizing the woman who looked back. The same woman who had walked 40 minutes in the rain to return something that wasn't hers, who had sat on strange rugs, building cities out of wooden blocks, who had learned that letting yourself be seen is not the same as being vulnerable to being discarded. Agnes cried from the beginning and made no attempt to stop. Leon, standing under the maple with the light in his face, watched Gemma walk toward him and felt, not for the first time but more fully than ever before, the specific relief of a man who has found his way back to something he thought was gone permanently. He held out his hand. She took it. Otto wedged himself between them during the vows and remained there for most of the ceremony, which no one had planned and everyone agreed was correct. In August, on a warm evening while Otto was inside showing Agnes his latest architectural drawing, a space station, mostly accurate, with one entire wing devoted to a snack room. Gemma and Leon sat on the bench beneath the maple, and Gemma turned to him with a particular kind of quiet on her face. She held up a small white box. He opened it. He looked up. She nodded before he had to say anything. He made a sound that was not quite a word and pulled her in with both arms, and she laughed against his shoulder. The kind of laugh that comes from a place so deep in a person it surprises even the one who's laughing. When Otto found out, he asked 2 questions. Can I be in charge of the name, and can I still have the snack room in my space station? Yes to both, they told him. Obviously, yes to both. The portfolio still sat on the shelf in Leon's office, the dark leather one, worn at the corners now. He'd framed Otto's drawing and hung it beside the door. The tall man in the suit, the small boy with his arms spread wide like wings, the house behind them. On evenings when the office was quiet, Gemma would stop in the doorway and look at it, that crayon drawing that had started everything, the one she'd tucked back into the folio in the rain on Bloor Street because it wasn't hers, because it was clearly someone's whole world. She thought sometimes about the version of herself who had stood at that curb in November with $300 in her hand and nowhere to go, counting the days since she'd eaten and the weeks since anyone had called. She thought about how close she'd come to walking away, to leaving it for someone else, to telling herself that one small dishonesty in a life full of loss was not so great a crime. She thought about her grandmother's voice. You always know what's right, Gem. She'd known, even then, and it had led her, without ceremony or plan or anything she could have predicted, straight to the place where she finally completely, undeniably belonged.